Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today we're discussing a rare watch. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master World Geographic, a 2006 debut that ran for approximately half a decade. It represents Jaeger-LeCoultre manufacturer complication watchmaking at its best. The ultimate travel watch. You can see and purchase this one on our website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos, and please click on the card in the upper right hand corner of the screen at any time during this video to see our full sales listing for this watch, with additional accessories included in the sale, high-resolution images for your desktop, and naturally complete pricing details for this Jaeger-LeCoultre Master World Geographic. Now, as I said, the watch came out in 2006, but it was rarely purchased because it was somewhat overshadowed by two more accessibly priced travel watches within the same family. There was the Master Geographic, which offered most of the practicality of a world time without forcing you to align your eyes along a radial array, and then there was the Master Home Time, which was a conventional dual time display. This watch, combining both a dual time with elements of the Geographic and a true Louis Coutier style radial world time, was rarely chosen, but often, when it was by a discerning connoisseur who realized how much value he was getting with this watch. Immense capability and a handsome style. It's also a versatile size. This is the classic case 146, as it's sometimes known, because it's stamped 146 on its case code. It's 41.5 millimeters across the round of the case. It was used for everything from sports watches, including divers, to grand complications, including perpetual calendars and tourbillon. Here, 41.5 across the round of the case, not including crowns. Relatively slim in profile at 12.5 millimeters. It's knocking on the door of the 12.2 millimeter thickness of a Rolex Daytona, so don't let that sheer flank fool you. This is actually a pretty thin watch. Now, across the wrist, it's 49.8 millimeters, which means JLC has done well to keep it under 50 millimeters lug-to-lug. For me, that's the point at which a smaller wrist begins to have more difficulty wearing a watch. And what do I define as a smaller wrist? Well, I would define a smaller wrist as about 16 centimeters down to 13 to 13.5 centimeters. And I believe down to 13.5 to 14 centimeters in circumference, you're going to be able to wear this watch with style and security. Now, you'll also note that because the lugs are rather tightly downturned and stubby, they don't tend to flare out over the edge of a wrist. You can see I've got some clearance on both sides. I could go smaller, but even if these were backed up right to the edge of my wrist, they downturn, they thrust down and away rather than flaring out. They're cropped, short, and stubby, so there's no aesthetic compromise that you might get with something that has long and straight and strong lug geometries. This is elegant, but it's not too insistent. Now, you can see that the watch uses semi-curved spring bars to allow the spring bar holes to be drilled closer to the case, so there's no constraint of the movement of the strap. You can pull it straight down. Again, ergonomics are good. This is a generously bolstered strap. It is massive considering the size of the watch. There's a lot of bolstering down the center. It's a light brown rectangular scale, medium scale alligator leather strap with monotone stitch and a folded edge, calfskin on the underside. The watch comes with JLC's third generation deployant clasp. This was its first generation double deployant clasp. You can see the chassis of the clasp is curved to match the shape of the underside of your wrist, and it has the two small closures, which I prefer because sometimes the one big up and over fold can actually pinch your wrist if you've got the watch buckled down to a small aperture and you have it tight for a small wrist. This isn't going to bite you, and it offers the low profile of a traditional pin buckle when it is buckled down and sized. The case is all of high polish. Its only real nuances are the junction between the case band and the bezel, and the case back and the case band. There's also a very small and very subtle bevel along the flank of the lug between the sheer side and the lug hood. It provides a little bit of a gentle transition to soften the mass of those huge steel lugs. But where the watch really comes into its own is in the color, the depth, and the clarity of the dial. Now, one feature I didn't love about this generation of Jaeger-LeCoultre was the frequent use of grayscale for everything. Silver dial, silver hands, silver indices, silver case. It gets to be a bit much. This Master World Geographic imparts a bit of color to the equation, which dilutes the dominance of grayscale and gives it a little bit more warmth and cheer, in my opinion. The dial also has depth and nuances. There are many countersunk scales for sub-registers. There's the Rayhaut style world time ring that slopes down in dramatic fashion to a bifurcated 24-hour reference ring that's used in conjunction with the reference cities to gauge the time in any of the world's 24 principal time zones. The way this works is you put your home city down here. I'm in Philadelphia, so U.S. East Coast time. New York, U.S. East Coast time, also identified with S next to New York. That lets you know that this time zone uses summertime when applicable. So I see my red index, I see my reference time. Now I can see the time in New York. You'll note that in New York it is just past 3 o'clock. Well, you can see, okay, there's 15 adjacent to the New York index, and I can count the minutes. It is approaching 3:25. It's about 3:23 right now. So you read your minutes at center, you read your reference hour in alignment with any of the 24 principal reference time zones, so you can tell the time all around the world all at once. Now the watch has a couple of functions. You can change your reference city, but note that this is bidirectional, and the 24-hour ring will move in sync with the cities, because if it's 6 p.m. in Singapore, it's 6 p.m. in Singapore. It doesn't really matter that you're changing your reference city. The time is the time in every given time zone, and that permanently. So you can see that the reference time zone will indicate a different time. This is where you put your home time. Your home time adjusts, and everything else adjusts in the reference ring in relation to that home time. Now there's another way to adjust that time zone. You can adjust it independently. You don't move the city, you just move the time. Again, the reference ring, the 24-hour, is adjusting in relation to the reference time zone, not the time at the center of the dial. I pull the crown out, now I hack the seconds hand, and I can adjust everything in sync. But notice that the reference city does not move when the watch is in this setting mode. It has a radial power display, or I guess it would be radial if it were a complete circle, but it's more like a quarter elliptical swoosh. And the watch has a 43-hour power reserve, fully wound. It can automatically wind itself, or you can wind it manually, and you note, because it is a relatively short power reserve, the alpha style indicator for the power reserve scale moves fairly quickly. There is a pusher adjuster on the case flank to adjust the radial display for the date, and the watch features a display case back, the better to see the manufacturer movement 936. Automatic winding with unidirectional action for efficiency. It compounds its efficiency advantage, let me try to get as close as I can here, by adding ceramic rotor bearings. Now the ceramic rotor bearings are at center. They're unlubricated, they roll quickly, they make a little bit more noise than a steel lubricated bearing, but that's more due to the lack of oils than it is the nature of ceramics. Because they operate unlubricated, they're both more efficient and they increase maintenance intervals. Now you'll note there's a circular Cote de Genève on the rotor as well as the bridges. These are true heat-fired, kiln-oxidized blued screws, and you can see the finish is handsome. While mostly mechanically applied, it's highly accomplished and inventive. It's anything but a default design. You'll note an open barrel that allows the movement to be made slimmer in profile, and this is a complicated mechanism with 38 joules and 322 parts. It takes an awful lot to accomplish the automatic winding Master World Geographic. Now, it is a dress watch, nevertheless it's water resistant to 50 meters, which is solidly more than the 20 to 30 meters standard in the dress watch class. Also important to note, the watch has been placed through the Master 1000 Hours control, which is a test, yes, of chronometric precision, but also resistances, power reserve, winding efficiency. It's a fully cased up standard to which the watch is subjected. And finally, it's worth mentioning that there are a number of refinements built into this caliber that came about as a result of IWC's experience using JLC movements in sports watches during the 90s. The principal advantages are the unidirectional winding system, the ceramic rotor bearings, and a free-sprung balance that better resists bumps, disruptions, shock, and concussion on the wrist. It has an additional advantage in that the hairspring is laser welded at the stud and the collet, both ends where it attaches to the rest of the caliber, the balance and the stud, the collet and the stud, that is. So the hairspring can't shift with respect to the structures to which it is attached. This is a tough, complex, practical, and uncommon watch. Again, built for about half a decade after 2006, you'll scarcely see these, and you may never see another. You can own this one on our website.